refurbishing a vise. I picked this vise up from the scrapyard for about £2, which is the value of the cast iron it's made from. But it's a British made vise. It's a record vise. It's only a small one, but they're very handy. And if you look at the other side, it says made in England. And it's a little bit in the reverse order because I've already taken the thing to pieces. So you have to see it. Basically, if these vises aren't looked after, then you get rust on the bearing surfaces, and then as somebody tries to open the vise, then it shears the pin that goes through the screw here. And so, can you see that pin there? That one. That has sheared off, and so the vise doesn't work anymore, so then it's scrap, as it were. However, to repair it, all you have to do is hammer out that pin, pull the washer and spring back, put a new split pin or whatever pin in. I'll show you that later. But that doesn't solve the problem. So the real cause of the problem is the bearing surfaces having rust. And the thing about British vises and the record vises is they're made to much better tolerances, and the cast iron is much better. So they are worth having a go at. I've cleaned the rust off. So what you have is bearing surfaces all the way along there, a bearing surface along there, and all I've used to clean them up, a bit of a file, just a little file, and sandpaper, because sandpaper isn't going to damage the surface. And by sanding it down, it's taken off the rust, and what you can see on there now are the markings from the milling that has been done to get that milled nicely. Easy to do those, a little bit more difficult to do the no, there they are. The other bearing surfaces are at the back there, and then there will be some bearing surfaces inside there. And the only way I can get to those bearing surfaces, which are the ones that get to the top, is with a file, just to clean them up. And once you've got them clean and lubricated, then hopefully they'll come out all right. Before I put it back together again, this pin here that I've knocked out, I had to do in order to remove the nut that the vise screw on the vise runs into, and that nut. I'll put it back in to there. If there's enough light. Sorry, it's moving about a lot. That might not be good. And when that's back in place, then I can knock that pin up, and that locks the nut into place. The nut is dovetailed, it goes into there, and the pin locates it, so that pin has to be removed for you to remove the nut. But you can't even see the pin until the vise is fully pulled out. Getting the vise fully pulled out, this part is not easy with the rust in place. But I would hope that would slide through there now. I'm trying to push it through now. That's it. It's gone through because I've sanded the rust off. So that is now sliding in there. And what I had to do initially was sand and file as much rust off as I could so it would come apart. How do you get it apart? First of all, you crank and pull and hammer it out. And I mean hammer, until it's far enough out so that you can see that pin. Then you knock the pin down. That allows you to then go forwards again to drop the nut out, and then that allows you to pull it back out again and remove it. So it's a two-stage process, and so I'm going to be doing that in reverse. I'll be pushing that in. I'll be looking for the screw. This is the reverse of the removal process. I'll be putting the screw into the nut, and I need 2 hands to do that, I think. And I'll just pause there. Okay, so I've got the screw started into the nut. Yep. Now what we can do is slide that back. Ooh. And if I can pull the vice jaws out far enough, then we should be able to get the nut into its dovetailed location, and then hammer this pin back up to lock the nut in place. And the only thing we have to do is replace the pin that's missing from here. And so before I fully put it back together again, I'm going to do that. And then what we've got is a vise that was scrap and only worth a couple of quid for the scrap metal, is restored to a functional thing, and being a British made vise, well worth the effort required to restore it. So that's my record. It doesn't say what number it is, does it? Made in England. Record vices usually have some sort of number. Oh, number 1. Record number 1. So number 1 vise. Really handy vise for a lot of purposes. And I'm going to be very pleased with that. And I'm not even going to bother repainting it. People do that. That's a cosmetic thing. It doesn't do anything about the functionality of it. I'm more interested in functionality rather than prettiness. Right, this is the bit for taking the vise apart. Okay, if it's rusty, the reason that pin in here is sheared is because the vise jars won't come out because the ways they slide on are too rusty. But if you clean them up as much as you can with it closed up, then you can move it apart. You might need to use a mallet or a rubber hammer. You get it so far out. At some point, when you get it out, you can see the pin that holds the nut in. You can drift that pin down. Once that pin is drifted down, you can push the vise closed. And once the vise is closed, you can remove the nut. And the reason I'm just going to wind this round to remove the nut fully. And it's still on the end of the screw. And the reason I'm removing the nut is because I want to actually get to the screw part itself. And it's still on the end of the screw. And drift out the pin that is holding the. It comes apart much more easily now because I've already checked the bedways. But what I want to do is drift out the pin that's left in there that's broken, so I can replace it with a new pin. This is my drift. It's a piece of steel about, hopefully, just the diameter a bit smaller than the thing I'm trying to knock out. I have used nails before to drift out pins. It will have got burred over. If it's too burred over to be drifted out, then I'll just have to file or grind it down so I can actually knock the pin out from in there. And that's a crucial part of removing it. Somebody has put a little tie wrap around the thread. I don't know if they're hoping that the tie wrap would make the vise work by supporting that. But anyway, there we go. Because when you're opening it, all you want to do is slide it open. You don't need a lot of force. The force is exerted on here when you're pulling the vise together. I'm not quite sure whether the thing I'm using to drift out the pin is small enough, but fortunately I might need to find a smaller diameter drift. You know what? I have a set of punches, and that's not small enough to drift out that pin. So I need to start again. Why is it you can never find the tools you want when you need them? So I have a set of drifts, but I'm resorting to a nail. And that's working. It's taking the pin. I don't know if you can see that. That pin there is moving the pin out. I have a pair of pipe grip pliers which may be able to twist it out of there without me having to drift it all the way through. I don't know. Yes, that has extracted the pin. At least I know what diameter it needs to be. If all else fails, that nail is about the right diameter. I can just hammer the nail in, can't I? Okay, having got that out, if I now cut the tie wrap that was put around there for some reason, presumably as an attempt to repair the vise, then I can make sure everything runs smoothly, get it back together, replace that pin, and yeah, so don't know how good the light is at the moment. I've just got the room lights on, but there's the hole. Pin needs to go through. So if I just clean up these things, make sure it slides nicely through the rest of the vise, then once that's sorted we can replace that pin, and it's moving reasonably well now. So having got the rust off it, it's moving reasonably well. Halfway there. The thing you notice about a British made vise is that it's a good smooth tight fit, and the vise jaws are nice and square and parallel. Beautiful movement there, and just exactly what you want from the vise. That's the sheared pin I have, so I can get the right size to replace it with a new pin. But it won't shear again now because I'll keep the vise. So to recap, there are two pins that hold the whole thing together. One is the pin that stops the nut from coming out, and that's that pin there. The nut is dovetailed in, and I've just hammered that home so the nut is secure. The other pin is the pin that goes through this hole here. The remnants of that. There's the drifts. It was on this piece of card. I've lost it, doesn't matter. But the pin that went through there had sheared off. And that saves the vise from more catastrophic damage, like stripping of the thread of the vise screw. When the bearing surfaces on the vise are rusted and you're trying to open the vise, which is pull it out against that pin, the shearing of the pin is what you want to happen to save the vise itself. But that then usually renders the vise as being something people think is inoperable, but means it's a repairable item, and I need to find an appropriate thing. I've got some split pins or something. If you get one the right diameter, I'll be able to put it through there. So what you have is a spring on here, then a washer, and then the pin through it. The spring and the washer. If I push that out, I'll let it fall out with the gravity. Whoops. Turn it the right way up. What you'll notice is, it's hard when I've got one hand on the camera, that this is sliding in and out of there. beautifully smoothly now. Works well. Little friction, but still quite a good tight fit. And then I can get the spring and washer which are in there. I put them back onto the screw thread. They're up there at the moment. I'm one-handed, and then insert a new pin into the hole that's in there, and the vise is back together again. So there we are, a quick look at my £2 vise from the scrapyard, converted from a weighty lump of scrap cast iron into a working vise again. And so once I've got that pin in there, I'm going to be very pleased with that, because the record #1 vise is a really useful size and one that can be attached to your working bench indoors, if not outdoors. Thank you for the video. Any comments? Welcome. And I hope for people that have got a vise that isn't working, that little bit about which pins you need to remove. That pin's like to be sheared, but also the pin to remove the nut, which you'll work it out if you're going to attempt this. Means pulling the whole thing back, opening the vise as wide as it can, which might be hard once it's rusted. Opening it up, you've just got to persevere, clean the rust off and open it. And once you've opened it as far as you can knock out the pin, then close it a little bit, and when you close it, you can then open it as far as you can knock out the pin, then close it again to get the nut off, and then you've got the vise in a way that means you can separate the two parts and clean up the bearing surfaces. Thank you.